Commissioner Good.
Mr. Byrne, according to the Washington Post, you're about to leave the Department of Homeland Security and go to work for Microsoft, an enterprise with which I have some familiarity. Will you, in working for Microsoft, be working on the other side of the coin that you're working on today in the Department of Homeland Security, in some kind of public-private partnership with respect to security, at least for that company? And assuming that the answer to that question is yes, will the work that you're doing for that single corporation be of value to other significant private sector firms or individuals?
I would hope so, sir. The opportunity that I'm going to Microsoft to work on is in the area of public safety and justice. That's the position I'm going to be holding. And what I'm hoping to do is to take a lot of the policy and the concepts that I've had the honor of working on in the last 2 years, and to start making them real, and to do as my colleagues here have said, take some best practices and institutionalize them, and to leverage technology in such a way that it can make us safer, because I truly believe it can, and that's why I plan on trying to help them do that.
And will you be working with DHS from that private sector and advising it on its practices?
I haven't worked that out yet. This is the Post coming out. This has all just happened very quickly. It's just well, actually a lot of the details we're just still working out at this point in time.
But you will be working in the same field that you're working in now, except
Yes.
that you will be working in the private sector.
Yes, sir.
General Reimer, you have the honor of working in a very typical medium-sized American city that suffered a terrorist attack considerably before 9/11. Is it your observation that Oklahoma City, that public-private partnerships there are far more aware of and far more sensitive to, and now far more successful in putting together an appropriate plan than would be the case in many cities like Oklahoma City that didn't suffer such a tragedy?
I think, Senator, in answering that question, I'd say that the real lesson of Oklahoma City was that terrorism can take place any place. We did not expect it on the 18th of April, 1995, and when it happened, people reacted, and they reacted very well. I think there was an initial surge to move out and try to do everything possible, first of all, to take care of the family members and survivors and ensure that as many people as possible survive that. That is still ongoing. And I certainly can identify with the previous panel because we deal with those people in Oklahoma City even 8 years after the tragedy, and there's tremendous emotion associated with that. The efforts, I think, had not expanded to the point that you direct in your question, and we hadn't gone to the point of private-public partnership at that particular point in time. There's a movement afoot to do that. But as I think everybody here knows, the issue here is resources and being able to address some of those issues that I identified. Private sector is a little reluctant to come forward with concerns about Freedom of Information Act and open records, open meetings. And so we have to overcome some of those obstacles. I think
And so that's true even in Oklahoma City?
In Oklahoma it is, yes, sir. And the willingness is there, but I can't say that they're better off than anybody else for the reasons I just mentioned.
Mr. Andrews, and the other two can comment on this as well. When you speak of these public-private sector partnerships, I at least get the implication that the overwhelming number of your associations are with relatively large corporations, and perhaps most where there's a real fear or apprehension of terrorism. What, in the views of any of you, can be done to broaden the concept of preparedness and especially of responses, particularly responses maybe of people who aren't the immediate victims of terrorism, but those who may help them afterwards, to smaller and medium-sized companies, to smaller and medium-sized communities like Oklahoma City, and even to get some of this knowledge and awareness through to people in their individual lives. When we talk about public-private partnerships now, are we really talking, mostly about New York City, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and big companies? Or do we have some kind of ideas of spreading these concepts more broadly?
Well, first of all, I think particularly with regard to the critical infrastructure and key assets, we are largely talking about large companies and firms that have what may be considered to be likely potential terrorist targets. But I think one of the challenges, not only just in preparedness for a terrorist event, but for any kind of emergency, has always been what you've identified. How do you involve the small businesses and how do you involve the individuals? One of the programs that really started in the city of Los Angeles has now spread nationally, is used by many companies, is used by the Department of Homeland Security, is something called CERT, Civilian Emergency Response Teams. And this is a very basic kind of training program in first aid and search and rescue and how to organize volunteers in the immediate period after a disaster. And that program has really spread on a nationwide basis. Again, preparedness is a constant process. It's the constant exercising of it by Merrill Lynch that made the difference. It wasn't simply having the plan. And so I think it is institutionalizing things like the CERT program. And again, that's had, I think, very, very significant success and something we need. It's one of those best practices that we need to continue to propagate across the country.
Senator, can I also comment on that, because I think this is an important point. I think there's a lot that can be done. I think, first of all, it's an educational process that this could affect all of us. I think you all talked earlier about corporate governance, and that is an important issue, I think. But again, as I say, it goes beyond corporate governance. It goes beyond protecting our citizens. I attended a seminar a little while back run by Marsh Consulting in the USA, and they took a half-day seminar where they brought companies there to talk about a scenario in which there was a chemical attack and how you would go about reacting to it. The bottom line was, if you didn't have a plan, then you weren't going to be able to do an audible at the line of scrimmage. And so we have to do the educational process. We have to have the plan. The plans are not that difficult. Those plans then have to be integrated in with the community, local police, the firemen, that type of thing, so we know floor plans. We know the vulnerability of those particular assets. We know the threat that exists. This is not laser brain surgery in terms of getting prepared. It's a matter of making up our mind to do it. A good example in our home state, Tulsa, has done a good job, I think, of bringing the public and private sector together, bringing the volunteers together, and it's basically done on the force of personality. Mayors who care, people who run Project Impact, those people make a difference. And I think that's the point I would make. It's the individuals that will make a difference here.
But I should have picked up more quickly on a rather surprising commentary you made. I expected you to answer my question is, yes, everybody in Oklahoma City knows what's going on. They're really prepared for it the second time around, and you didn't answer via that fashion. But you did mention what I think may be one difficulty that you could comment on or the others could comment on. The fear of some in the private sector that when they get too close to the public sector, they're subject to Open Meetings Act. They may have to give up information that they consider to be proprietary and that could be of advantage to a competitor and the like. How much of an obstacle is that, and is there anything that we can do about it?
It's huge, Senator. It is huge, and I think it is the primary stumbling block for these private sector personnel in terms of being able to overcome these obstacles that exist. The intent there in Oklahoma City is there. You don't have to fire up the intent. They know what happened in '95, and they're willing to do everything they can. But when they do the risk-benefit analysis of it, and they're not sure that they're going to be able to do it and still protect that information, still be able to do what they have to do. And I think we have to address those valid concerns. They may be perceptions, but that's what they're dealing with out there. So I think it's a huge issue that has to be addressed.
And I think somewhat in referenced earlier, the differences across the states of regulations as they relate to insurance. The same thing relates to Freedom of Information Act. It's for companies that operate across state boundaries, the regulations in different states are different. I think there's an exemption under the law that established the Department of Homeland Security that information that's provided regarding the critical infrastructure to DHS is exempt from disclosure, and some states have passed laws to that effect. But the absence of that on a nationwide basis is very definitely a deterrent to particularly the owners and operators of critical infrastructure sectors to providing that information.
Mr. Byrne, is that last comment true? And the private sector people that you deal with believe it? And are they willing to do more than they otherwise would be willing to do?
I do find that in the National Capital Region, but it is something that we have to nurture. It's something that is new. It is something that everybody's getting used to. But I do find good cooperation, especially with the power companies in the National Capital Region. We're doing a critical infrastructure analysis, not just of each individual asset, but it's cross dependencies, and then working together. And they're at the table doing this and willingly coming up with a list of what steps should be the ones we take first to protect the infrastructure.
Well, Mr. Byrne, you're going to a private sector company that has an awful lot of trade secrets, and I hope that you're going to be able to work with them and with others in a way that will make any lessons that you have applicable beyond a single company and perhaps an example to others.
Sure, we'll work on it, sir. I'm not changing who I am or my goals. I was very moved by the testimony of the previous panel, as I'm sure all of us were. I knew two of the firefighters they mentioned. They were friends and colleagues of mine. It's too important to be proprietary.
One brief question for General Reimer. When I last worked with you, General Reimer, you were head of FORSCOM. And so that is the capacity, and I find it very interesting to see how your career has segued. My question to you is this. We have a challenge to our nation that we are currently meeting with good folks like the people in Homeland Security who are amalgams of various agencies that already had pre-existing missions when they were brought together at the Department of Homeland Security, and to a certain extent, law enforcement outside of the Department of Homeland Security. And just taking, for example, the FBI. The FBI has approximately 11,000 agents for the whole country. And they are given primary responsibility for defending us, if you will, against domestic attack, with some additional resources at the Department of Homeland Security. Whereas the combatant commander or SINC for, say, the Pacific might have 300,000 personnel to defend U.S. interests in the Pacific. And this is a question to you, looking across your career, wearing all the hats you've ever worn. Have we right-sized and designated the right people in our government to defend us domestically?
Mr. Gorelick, first of all, let me just say that I remember you well from the Department of Defense, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you for keeping me out of jail. You went on to do bigger and better things, but
it wasn't hard for the national audience. It was not hard to keep this gentleman out of jail.
The question is a very good one, and I'll give you my personal view on this right now. I truly believe that the Department of Defense needs to be more involved in an assist mode. The first responders in terms of, or the emergency responders, are going to be the firemen, the policemen, the emergency medical personnel, those people that are on the front lines. They're civilians.
As they were in Oklahoma City. They were the first people
Exactly right,
there.
as they were in the World Trade Center and
Yes.
the Pentagon. And there's been a fire chief who's been the incident commander in all three of those that you mentioned. So I don't think the issue is that the military is going to come in and take control. The military, though, has a number of things that I think lend themselves very well to the issue we're talking about. I'm a big proponent of the National Guard pulling a greater role. First of all, they have the dual status of both the state and federal status. They are readily accessible to the governor. They have a Title 32 responsibility, which you know well, but they're allowed to operate inside the posse comitatus limitations that the federal force is not allowed to operate with. So I think they can provide a great role. I think also the experience the defense has gained. Just the idea of sharing lessons, the lessons learned that we're trying to put together is patterned after the Center for Army Lessons Learned. We have experience that tells us that people will not share honest information on this, and if they're going to feel like their head's going to get cut off or you're going to come down hard on them. So you have to kind of figure out how you're going to do this so that people will talk honestly about the mistakes they made. There are big issues associated with this in the civilian world, with liability issues, bosses who might come down and say, well, you made that mistake, we don't need you in this department any longer. So I think there's a lot that the military can do in terms of things that we have benefited from over time. We have to find a way to civilianize those. We can't just take the military model and superimpose it upon what we're trying to do in the homeland. But I think the military can assist, and particularly the National Guard can assist.
And if you were looking at rough orders of magnitude of the numbers of personnel, of people in the government who would need to be deployed to adequately assess the vulnerabilities of our infrastructure, make plans for protecting them, and activate such protective mechanisms when an area of our country is under threat. Rough order of magnitude, how many people would you, wearing your FORSCOM hat, how many people would you allocate to that job domestically?
Are you talking about military personnel?
No, forget the hat they're wearing. I'm talking about, are we right-sized for the job that we're discussing today?
Well, I think it's got to be a more of an interagency approach to this thing, and I think as we talked about, I believe the military can assist. I think the military can assist primarily through the National Guard, and I don't think it'll require additional force structure or troops to do that type of thing. It'll require some fine-tuning. It makes no sense in my mind to take people who are emergency responders, firemen and policemen, mobilize them and send them to Germany to protect an air base. That's not very smart, and I think we have to figure out how we use the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense to merge together in a better way. I would be very hesitant to give you a number except to say that I think the numbers exist. That's not the issue. The issue is trying to get the policy to coincide and make a decision that we're going to do it. I think the numbers are there. It's to bring them together.
We're quite short of time today, but I, for one, would like to make more extensive use of the expertise that is on this panel today, and I hope you will all agree to help us in our private sessions.